Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. The photograph before us appears unremarkable at first glance. A sepia-toned image from 1910, showing the sparse interior of what was once Wellmeadow Asylum in northern England. The image captures a young girl, perhaps 12 or 13, seated on a narrow iron bed. Her dark hair is neatly braided, falling over the shoulders of her institutional gown. Unlike many asylum photographs from this era, she isn't restrained. Instead, she sits with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, staring not at the camera but slightly to her right, as if listening to someone just out of frame. What makes this image truly unsettling isn't what we see, but what we know from the asylum's admission records. The ledger, discovered during the building's demolition in 1976, contains a detailed entry about this child. Her name was Eleanor Caldwell, daughter of a respected local physician. The reason for her admission, written in the meticulous handwriting of the asylum's director: persistent delusion of a twin sister with whom patient converses daily. Patient becomes agitated when told no such sister exists. Further investigation into parish records confirmed that Eleanor was indeed an only child. Dr. Caldwell and his wife had no other children, living or deceased. Yet the asylum's daily logs document multiple instances of attendants finding Eleanor engaged in animated conversations with an empty space. When interrupted, she would simply state, "I was talking to Charlotte." What's particularly disturbing is the progression noted in Eleanor's file. Initially, staff dismissed the imaginary twin as a childhood coping mechanism. But 3 months after her admission, nurses began reporting strange occurrences in Eleanor's room. Objects would move. Doors would open and close. One night, a attendant resigned after claiming to have heard 2 distinct children's voices coming from the locked room, though Eleanor was its sole occupant. The photograph we're examining was taken 6 months into Eleanor's stay. The staff photographer noted something peculiar in his log. The glass plate negative showed a strange blur beside Eleanor, which he attributed to a flaw in the development process. That negative has since been lost. Eleanor remained at Wellmeadow for 2 years before being released back to her parents' care, with notes indicating her delusion persisted, but was no longer considered harmful. What's even more intriguing is what happened afterward. The Caldwell family home burned to the ground in 1914, claiming the lives of both parents. Eleanor, however, survived. When found by neighbors, the girl reportedly said, "Charlotte woke me." Eleanor Caldwell disappears from public records after this incident. Some speculate she was sent to live with distant relatives. Others suggest a different institution. The most disturbing theory emerges from a single newspaper clipping from 1922, which mentions a young woman found wandering near the ruins of the Caldwell estate, claiming to be Charlotte Caldwell, finally free. As we look deeper into this photograph, we must ask, what did Eleanor Caldwell see that others couldn't? Was her twin sister merely a figment of a troubled mind? Or was there something else entirely sharing that small asylum room? The Wellmeadow Asylum case files contain more than just Eleanor's admission records. During my research, I discovered a series of interview transcripts conducted by Dr. Ambrose Whitley, the institution's leading physician. Whitley, known for his controversial approaches to treating delusional disorders, took particular interest in Eleanor's case. In one session dated November 12, 1910, Whitley attempted a new technique involving a mirror. The transcript reads, "Patient was positioned before looking glass. When asked what she observed, EC reported seeing herself and Charlotte beside me. When I noted only her reflection was visible, patient became agitated, insisting, 'Charlotte always shows in mirrors. That's how I know she's real.'" What's striking is Whitley's marginal note. Curious behavior of reflection noted, appears to move independently when EC remains still. Possible light anomaly or eye strain from extended observation. More telling is the testimony of Nurse Margaret Harrow, who supervised Eleanor during night shifts. Harrow, by all accounts a practical woman not given to flights of fancy, requested reassignment after 3 months. In her formal request, preserved in staff records, she wrote, "I cannot explain the singing that comes from the child's room after lights out. 2 voices in perfect harmony, though the door remains locked and Eleanor lies visible in her bed. I have witnessed her lips moving to one melody, while another, higher voice, provides accompaniment." The asylum's maintenance logs reveal another peculiarity. Room 14, Eleanor's room, required frequent repairs. Wall plaster would crack overnight. Window latches would break. Bed frames would inexplicably bend. The superintendent attributed these occurrences to Eleanor's violent episodes, though attendants consistently reported her as docile and well-behaved. Dr. Caldwell visited his daughter weekly, according to visitor logs. His wife never accompanied him. These visits apparently caused tension among the staff. One orderly's disciplinary record mentions his dismissal after suggesting to colleagues that the doctor knows more about the twin than he admits. Parish records from St. Michael's Church offer an intriguing possibility. While Eleanor was indeed registered as an only child, I discovered a small notation in the margin of her baptismal record. Second infant, stillborn, name unrecorded. The date matches Eleanor's birth. The attending midwife's separate notes, preserved in local archives, mention identical girls, one living, one not. Most compelling is a letter I found in the Caldwell family correspondence, now housed in the County Historical Society, written by Mrs. Caldwell to her sister just weeks before Eleanor's admission to Wellmeadow. She expresses increasing concern. Edward insists we must send her away. The girl knows things she shouldn't, things about Charlotte. He says it's madness speaking. But how could Eleanor describe the birthmark on Charlotte's shoulder when we never told her of the other baby? Edward burned all evidence of the twin years ago, yet Eleanor speaks of her as if they share the same thoughts. I fear it isn't madness we're locking away, but something we simply cannot understand. The photograph takes on new meaning with these details. Perhaps Eleanor wasn't looking at empty space after all, but at something, or someone, the camera failed to capture. The Wellmeadow Asylum building itself holds clues that few have considered. After obtaining special permission to visit the remaining East Wing, the only section spared from demolition, I discovered architectural oddities that might explain some of the phenomena surrounding Eleanor Caldwell. The children's ward was constructed with unusual features: walls of varying thickness, curved corridors that created acoustic anomalies, and air shafts that carried sounds between rooms in unpredictable ways. More telling was Room 14's proximity to the facility's morgue. Only a narrow service corridor separated the two spaces. According to the building's original blueprints, this design was intentional, part of Dr. Whitley's belief that proximity to death helped temper the excitable minds of the young. The asylum's chaplain, Father Morris, kept separate records from the medical staff. His journal, discovered in a church archive, mentions Eleanor specifically. The Caldwell child speaks of her sister not as a fantasy, but as a presence. She describes Charlotte as sometimes here, sometimes there, suggesting not hallucination, but something transient. When I asked if Charlotte was an angel, the child laughed and said, "No, Father, she's just like me, except she can walk through walls." Perhaps most chilling was my discovery in the asylum's photographic collection. While the negative of Eleanor's portrait remains lost, I found 5 other photographs taken the same day. Each shows different patients in various settings. In all 5 images, a peculiar light aberration appears, a whitish blur consistently the size and rough shape of a young girl. The photographer's log dismisses these as chemical imperfections, yet they appear in identical form across multiple plates. The Caldwell family physician, Dr. Samuel Norton, provided another perspective in his private correspondence with a colleague at Edinburgh University. Edward Caldwell's insistence on committing the child stems not from medical concern but fear. The girl speaks of events that occurred in the household before her birth. She describes rooms in their previous home with uncanny accuracy, rooms she never saw. Edward believes his dead child somehow communicates with the living one. I cannot endorse such supernatural notions, yet I find myself unable to offer a scientific explanation for the child's knowledge. Local newspaper archives yielded an interview with a former kitchen worker at the Caldwell estate, published years after the fire. She recalled, "The mistress would set 2 places at Eleanor's table. The master would rage about it, but Mrs. Caldwell would say, 'I've heard them both laughing upstairs. I won't have one child fed and the other hungry.'" The staff knew better than to mention it. The asylum's discharge records indicate Eleanor left Wellmeadow not because her condition improved, but because Dr. Whitley himself recommended her release. His final notation reads, "Patient's delusion remains fixed. However, I can no longer definitively state that it is indeed a delusion. Some mysteries exceed current medical understanding. The child may be safer outside these walls." Most revealing was my recent interview with Maria Thornfield, now 97, who worked as a young maid in the Caldwell household after Eleanor's return. Her hands trembled as she recounted, "The night of the fire I heard them arguing. Not the parents, but the girls. Two voices, one saying they must leave, the other refusing. Then the smell of smoke. I saw Miss Eleanor in the hallway, following something I couldn't see. She turned and said to me, "Charlotte's angry tonight." I fled the house. I've told no one this until now. The photographic evidence surrounding Eleanor Caldwell took an unexpected turn last week. While researching another case entirely, I discovered a collection of uncatalogued glass plate negatives in the university archives. Among them was a sleeve simply marked W.A. Patient Belongings, 1910. Inside was a child's drawing, carefully preserved between two glass plates. The crayon illustration shows two identical girls holding hands, standing before what appears to be the Caldwell family home. Both wear matching dresses with distinct collars that match the institutional gown in Eleanor's photograph. The drawing is signed Eleanor and Charlotte in childish handwriting. What makes this discovery remarkable is that the drawing was created using different colored crayons for each figure, Eleanor in blue, Charlotte in red, yet the pressure patterns and stroke characteristics are identical for both figures, suggesting they were drawn by the same hand in the same session without pause. Dr. Whitley's personal diary, recently donated by his granddaughter, contains an entry not found in the official medical records. He describes an experiment conducted in February 1911. Placed a bell in EC's room while she slept, behind a screen where she could not possibly reach it. Left recorder running overnight. Results disturbing. Bell rings distinctly at 3:17 a.m. Recording captures child's voice saying, "Stop it, Charlotte, you'll wake them." No movement visible on my side of the observation window. The diary also reveals Whitley installed primitive temperature monitoring equipment in Eleanor's room after nurses complained of cold spots. His entries document temperature drops of 15 degrees in localized areas, always corresponding with Eleanor's reports of Charlotte's presence. I tracked down Elizabeth Pearson, granddaughter of Harold Pearson, the photographer who captured Eleanor's image. She granted me access to her grandfather's journal, in which he wrote of developing the asylum photographs. The girl in 14 produces the strangest effects on the plates. While developing her portrait, I observed the blur beside her actually change and shift in the solution, as if moving of its own accord. I've worked with chemicals for 20 years and never witnessed such a phenomenon. Perhaps most significant is what I found in the cemetery records of St. Michael's Church. The Caldwell family plot contains 4 marked graves: Dr. Edward Caldwell, his wife Marion, Eleanor's grandfather, and an infant marker reading only Baby Girl Caldwell, with Eleanor's birth date. However, ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted with the church's permission reveal an anomaly. The infant's coffin appears empty. The current owner of the rebuilt Caldwell property contacted me after hearing of my research. For years, they've experienced phenomena they couldn't explain: items moving, doors opening, and the sounds of children playing in empty rooms. During renovations, workers discovered a hidden space between walls containing a child's nightgown, identical to the one Eleanor wears in the asylum photograph, yet cut into 2 halves down the middle. Most unsettling was my visit to the county records office last month. While examining the death certificates from the Caldwell house fire, I noticed something overlooked for over a century. The medical examiner documented 2 distinct sets of small footprints in the ash leading away from the house. One set showing normal progression, the other appearing and disappearing at irregular intervals, as if someone was walking beside Eleanor, fading in and out of existence with each step into the night. The Eleanor Caldwell case took an unexpected direction when I received correspondence from Meredith Johnson, curator at the Westmoreland Medical History Museum. She had discovered several audio wax cylinders in their collection, originally recorded by Dr. Whitley using an Edison phonograph, a cutting-edge technology for 1910. The museum technicians had carefully transferred these fragile recordings to modern media. What I heard chilled me to my core. The first recording captured Eleanor's voice during what appears to be a standard psychiatric evaluation. Her responses sound measured and calm until Dr. Whitley asks about Charlotte. There's a noticeable pause, followed by Eleanor whispering something inaudible. When Whitley asks her to speak up, 2 voices respond in perfect unison. She doesn't like that question. The second voice, though similar in timbre, is distinctly higher pitched. The museum also provided Whitley's experimental case notes, including a series of tests involving twin studies. Whitley had brought documented twins to interact with Eleanor, hoping to determine if her delusion matched known twin behaviors. His marginal notes indicate Eleanor displayed knowledge of established twin phenomena never published outside academic circles, including cryptophagia, a private language sometimes developed between twins. Further investigation led me to Caroline Matthews, whose grandmother Agnes served as night matron at Well Meadow. Caroline preserved her grandmother's personal diary, which describes an incident omitted from official records. On Christmas Eve 1910, Agnes entered room 14 to find Eleanor alone, singing carols. When Agnes joined in, a third voice, neither hers nor Eleanor's, became audible, harmonizing perfectly. Agnes wrote, "When I stopped singing in shock, both girls' voices continued for several measures before Eleanor noticed my distress." The diary also recounts Agnes discovering Eleanor's hair arranged in an elaborate braid each morning, though the child was alone all night. When questioned, Eleanor simply said, "Charlotte does my hair while I sleep, just like at home." The land registry office yielded another significant find. The Caldwell property was built atop the foundations of a much older structure, a 14th century nunnery dissolved during the Reformation. Archaeological surveys conducted in 1934 documented unusual burials within those foundations, including several sets of twin children interred together. Most compelling was my discovery in Dr. Caldwell's private medical files. Marion Caldwell had been treated for nervous exhaustion shortly before Eleanor's admission to Well Meadow. Her symptoms included insomnia caused by hearing children's conversations through the walls. Dr. Caldwell prescribed increasingly powerful sedatives, noting his wife had become irrationally fixated on the notion that Eleanor is somehow both children at once. The final piece emerged last week when ground-penetrating radar revealed something beneath Eleanor's bedroom at the original Caldwell house site. A small sealed chamber containing a child-sized rocking chair, toys, and a mirrored surface etched with two names, Eleanor and Charlotte. This hidden room, accessible only through a now bricked passage, suggests Dr. Caldwell created a secret space for one daughter while publicly acknowledging only the other. As I continue piecing together this fragmented history, I'm left wondering, was Charlotte truly a delusion, a ghost, or something else entirely? Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that both girls existed simultaneously, one acknowledged by society, one hidden away until death merged their experiences into a single, fractured consciousness that only Eleanor could perceive. The most remarkable twist in the Eleanor Caldwell case materialized when I located Dr. Edward Caldwell's personal journal, sealed in the cornerstone of the rebuilt family home. His entries paint a vastly different picture than the clinical asylum records suggest. In trembling handwriting dated 3 months before Eleanor's commitment, Edward confesses, "I have made a terrible mistake. The girls were indeed identical, perfect mirrors of each other, except Charlotte emerged not breathing. I pronounced her stillborn, as was my duty. Marion held Eleanor while I prepared the other child for burial. Yet when I returned, I found my wife speaking to both babies, one living in her arms, one lying motionless in the cradle. I dismissed it as grief." His subsequent entries document increasing concern as Eleanor developed. She converses with empty air, yet describes her sister with perfect accuracy, the sister she never saw, whose existence we never mentioned. Today she described the birthmark on Charlotte's left shoulder blade, shaped like a crescent moon, a mark I documented in my medical notes, but shared with no one, not even Marion. Perhaps most disturbing is his entry from October 19, 1909. I entered Eleanor's room last night to find her bed empty. For one terrible moment, I feared the worst. Then I heard her voice from the closet, "Be quiet, he'll hear us." When I opened the door, Eleanor sat alone among her dresses. The mirror inside the closet door showed 2 reflections, though only one child sat before it. I closed the door and fled. The village postal records contain another revelation. Monthly packages were delivered to Well Meadow Asylum addressed to Eleanor Caldwell, with Dr. Caldwell listed as sender. When I traced these packages, I discovered they contained identical dresses, shoes, and hair ribbons, always in pairs. The asylum's requisition logs show these items were inventoried as single pieces, with no mention of duplicates. Former Well Meadow groundskeeper Thomas Halley, now in his 90s, shared his experience during a recorded interview. The little Caldwell girl would come to the garden with her nurse. The strange thing was the shadows. The child would cast 2 distinct shadows, even on cloudy days. None of the other patients did this. The nurses pretended not to notice, but they always crossed themselves when walking past her. Most compelling is what I discovered beneath the floorboards of room 14 during my final visit to the asylum ruins. A small tin box contained dozens of notes written in child's handwriting, apparently hidden by Eleanor during her stay. The notes are written in two distinct hands, conducting a continuous conversation. "Why can't they see you?" asks one hand. "Because I'm only half here," responds the other. "Where is the other half?" "In the ground. But it's empty now. Will we ever be properly together?" "We already are. We're just not properly apart." The final note, dated the day before the Caldwell house fire, chills me most. "Tonight we decide. Either both here or both there. Father kept us apart once. Never again." As I compile this research, one question haunts me. If Charlotte somehow existed between worlds, neither fully alive nor dead, what exactly happened on the night of the fire? And more disturbingly, as suggested by that newspaper clipping from 1922, which sister actually survived? The mystery of Eleanor Caldwell took an unexpected turn when I received an unmarked package last Tuesday. Inside was a water-damaged leather diary, its pages brittle with age. A note attached simply read, "Found during renovations at St. Catherine's Home for Girls, 1930 through 1948. St. Catherine's was a small private institution for orphaned girls some 60 miles from Well Meadow Asylum." The diary belonged to Sister Agnes Merrill, a nurse who transferred there after Well Meadow closed its children's ward in 1915. Her entries primarily concerned administrative matters until September 11, 1927, when she wrote, "A new arrival today. A young woman of perhaps 28 or 29 brought an adolescent girl to our door. The woman appeared greatly distressed, claiming she could no longer care for her sister. The girl, approximately 15 years old, was unnaturally calm. When asked her name, she hesitated before answering, 'Charlotte.' Later, when I returned with admission forms, I discovered the woman had vanished without providing contact information. Sister Agnes described the girl as well-spoken and eerily composed, with dark braided hair and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at you. Charlotte was assigned a bed in the East Dormitory, but the following week's entry notes a peculiar development. The other children refused to sleep near Charlotte. They claim she speaks to herself all night in two distinct voices. Miss Winters found her this morning in conversation with her reflection in the washroom mirror. When interrupted, the girl said, 'We were deciding whose turn it is today.' Most disturbing is Sister Agnes's documentation of Charlotte's unusual knowledge. The girl could describe in perfect detail the childhood homes of staff members she'd never visited. She recounted conversations that occurred behind closed doors. Sister Agnes initially attributed this to eavesdropping until Charlotte correctly described the late husband Agnes had lost before taking religious orders, a man whose photograph wasn't displayed at St. Catherine's. The diary details a particularly unsettling incident during winter 1928. During a severe snowstorm that isolated the institution for 3 days, residents reported seeing Charlotte in two places simultaneously. Sister Agnes initially dismissed these claims until she herself witnessed something inexplicable. "I was taking inventory in the storage room when I glanced through the window and saw Charlotte crossing the yard toward the chapel, despite the blizzard conditions. Concerned, I rushed to intercept her, only to find Charlotte sitting in the library as I passed, reading quietly by the fire. When questioned, she smiled and said, 'One of us had to pray, and one of us had to finish this story.' I am beginning to question my senses." The final entries reveal Sister Agnes's growing conviction that Charlotte harbored two distinct personalities, one gentle and introspective, the other calculating and cold. These shifts occurred without warning, often multiple times daily. What troubled Agnes most was her growing certainty that these weren't psychological fluctuations but something more fundamental, as if two separate people shared a single physical form. The diary ends abruptly after an entry dated April 9, 1929. Charlotte approached me today with a peculiar request. She asked if I would help her visit her parents' grave in her hometown. When I reminded her she came to us as an orphan, she fixed me with that penetrating stare and whispered, "They died in the fire, but only one of us escaped. We've been taking turns ever since, but we're so tired of sharing. I shall speak with Dr. Harmon about these concerning delusions." No further entries appear. My inquiries to St. Catherine's archives revealed that Sister Agnes Merrill left the institution suddenly that same month. Her resignation letter cited unspecified health concerns. The archive of St. Catherine's yielded one final document related to Charlotte, a hastily filed incident report dated April 10, 1929, just one day after Sister Agnes's last diary entry. The report, written by groundskeeper William Forster, describes finding Sister Agnes unconscious in the chapel at dawn. When revived, she appeared disoriented and repeatedly asked, "Which one are you now?" to her rescuers. Most telling was the report's final line: "Patient Charlotte missing from dormitory. Personal effects undisturbed. I traced Sister Agnes's movements after her abrupt departure. She didn't return to her previous religious order but instead sought treatment at Helmwood Sanatorium, where admission records list her diagnosis as acute nervous exhaustion with persistent delusions. Her medical file contains transcripts of sessions with Dr. Julian Barrett, who specialized in treating religious workers suffering mental collapse. During her third session, Sister Agnes made a startling claim. The girl contained two souls in one body. When I looked into her eyes in the chapel that night, I saw them separating, like oil rising through water. She told me they had mastered it now, the ability to trade places completely. One would inhabit the body while the other would wait elsewhere, but they were tired of taking turns. The most revealing document arrived yesterday, a letter from the Westshire County Records Office responding to my inquiry. They located a marriage certificate from 1931 for a Charlotte Caldwell, aged 19, weed to industrialist Henry Blackstone. The bride's witness was listed as Eleanor Caldwell, described as her twin sister. A newspaper announcement of the wedding mentions the twins as daughters of the late Dr. Edward Caldwell, tragically lost in a house fire some years prior. This suggests a stunning possibility. Not that one sister survived the fire, but that both did, sharing a single physical form until they somehow learned to separate their consciousness enough to establish distinct identities in society. The Blackstone family records show Charlotte gave birth to twin girls in 1933. Henry Blackstone's private correspondence with family physician Dr. Morris contains a disturbing observation. "My wife appears to be two different mothers to our daughters, some days loving and attentive, other days cold and distant, as if the children are strangers to her. More unsettling is how the girls respond. They seem to know instinctively which mother is present on any given day. Most chilling is what I discovered in the Blackstone family cemetery last week. The elaborate marble headstone marks a single grave with two names, Charlotte Caldwell Blackstone and Eleanor Caldwell, beloved sisters united in death as in life, 1910 to 1948. The death date coincides with a sanatorium fire that claimed 23 lives, yet hospital records list only Charlotte Blackstone among the deceased. No Eleanor Caldwell appears on any patient roster or death certificate. I've arranged to interview the surviving Blackstone daughter next month. Her response to my inquiry was brief but bewildering. "I was 12 when Mother died in the fire. Aunt Eleanor visited only once after that, to tell me they would never need to take turns again. I didn't understand then. Perhaps I still don't." The Blackstone daughter, Margaret, sits across from me in a sunlit conservatory at her estate in Cornwall. At 82, her mind remains remarkably sharp, though her hands tremble slightly as she places a weathered leather album on the table between us. "I found this after your letter arrived," she says. "It belonged to my father. He kept it locked in his study safe. I only discovered the key after his death in 1962. The album contains photographs chronicling Charlotte Blackstone's life after her marriage. What strikes me immediately is the inconsistency in her appearance. Though always recognizably the same woman, her expressions, posture, and manner of dress alternate between two distinct styles, sometimes soft and maternal, other times poised and distant. Father called them her aspects," Margaret explains. "The staff had different names, Morning Madam and Evening Madam. As children, my sister and I simply knew which mother we would encounter by the way the bedroom curtains were arranged each morning. Open completely meant Mother would be warm and affectionate. Half-drawn signaled her reserved nature would dominate. More revealing are the photographs where Charlotte appears subtly different from one image to the next, though taken minutes apart according to the timestamps. In one garden party sequence, her hair part shifts from left to right between frames. In another, a birthmark visible on her wrist suddenly appears on the opposite hand. The photographers always complained about double exposures when taking Mother's picture," Margaret says. "Even with the most modern cameras, strange aberrations would appear, shadow-like duplications, blurring around her outline. Father eventually hired only one photographer who didn't ask questions. Margaret retrieves a small wooden box from beside her chair. Inside rests a silver hand mirror, its surface clouded with age. This belonged to my mother. Each night, she would sit before her vanity and speak to her reflection for exactly 7 minutes. My sister and I once spied through the keyhole. We saw her lips moving, but the reflection's movements didn't match. When we told Father, he forbade us from ever watching again. The most significant item Margaret shares is a letter dated 3 days before the sanatorium fire. Charlotte had checked herself in for what was described to the children as exhaustion treatment. The letter, addressed to Henry Blackstone, contains a passage that sends a chill down my spine. We've decided, my dearest. After all these years, the strain of division has become unbearable. The doctors here have unwittingly shown us the way with their experimental treatments. The electrical currents they believe will calm me have instead illuminated the path. Charlotte believes, and I agree, that the strongest surge might create enough separation for one to finally depart, while one remains whole. We've bribed an orderly to increase the voltage. By the time you receive this, we will have attempted our final division. With luck, one of us will return to you. With greater luck, you'll never know which one. As twilight falls, Margaret walks me to my car. Before I leave, she hesitates, then whispers, "There's something I've never told anyone. The night after the fire, I woke to find someone sitting on the edge of my bed. Mother, but somehow not Mother. Her voice was different, lighter. She stroked my hair and said, 'Charlotte gave everything so I could be here completely. Now I can be your mother without sharing anymore.' Then she kissed my forehead and was gone by morning. Father received news of her death the following day. The photograph of Eleanor Caldwell has drawn unexpected attention since my last publication. 3 days ago, I received a parcel from the descendants of Dr. Julian Barrett, the psychiatrist who treated Sister Agnes. Inside was a journal containing Barrett's private thoughts on cases he considered beyond conventional explanation. His entries about Sister Agnes reveal what official records omitted. Barrett initially believed her account of Charlotte Caldwell's dual nature was symptomatic of shared psychosis. Then he conducted a hypnotic regression session that changed his perspective entirely. Under hypnosis, Sister Agnes recalled details impossible to fabricate, speaking in 2 distinct voices, one identifying as the sister who lived, and the other as the sister who died. Most startling was Barrett's documentation of physical changes during this session. As Agnes channeled the voice she called Charlotte, her facial features subtly shifted. Her right eye appeared darker, her jawline sharper. When the second voice emerged, claiming to be Eleanor, these features reverted while others transformed. I have no medical explanation for physiognomic changes occurring in real time. Barrett became so disturbed by these sessions he consulted a theologian from Oxford University. Their correspondence suggests both men reached a disturbing hypothesis, that the Caldwell twins represented an extraordinarily rare phenomenon where 2 complete souls occupied a contested physical vessel, one soul with rightful claim to the body, the other refusing to depart. The theological implications troubled Barrett deeply. "If 2 souls can inhabit one form," he wrote, "what becomes of our understanding of human identity? More troubling still, what happens if they learn to separate at will?" Barrett tracked Charlotte Blackstone's medical history after Sister Agnes's treatment ended. Hospital records from 1935 document Charlotte's emergency admission after being found unconscious in her garden. Upon awakening, she exhibited confusion about her surroundings and claimed to be Eleanor. This episode was diagnosed as temporary dissociative amnesia and treated with rest. Barrett's margin notes suggest a different interpretation: transition event. The sisters are learning to exchange dominance without the psychological scaffolding of institutional identity. I've discovered that following the sanatorium fire, investigators found something peculiar in the ruins of Charlotte's room. The official report mentions 2 sets of personal effects arranged in mirror opposition on either side of the bed, as if for 2 separate occupants. The fire's point of origin was traced to this room, though the cause was never definitively established. Perhaps most illuminating was a collection of drawings discovered among Margaret Blackstone's childhood possessions. These crayon sketches show 2 identical women emerging from a single body, splitting apart like cells dividing. The final drawing in the series depicts one figure ascending skyward, while the other remains earthbound, arms outstretched toward her departing twin. The electrical treatment referenced in Charlotte's final letter aligns with experimental procedures documented at the sanatorium. Dr. Howard Merritt, the facility's director, believed electrical stimulation could separate fractured aspects of personality for independent treatment. His research was discredited after several patients suffered unexplained neurological damage. I'm left wondering if the Caldwell twins achieved something science couldn't explain. The complete separation of two souls that had shared one physical existence since birth. The fire may have been not a tragedy, but a catalyst, creating the conditions for final division. Which sister returned to the Blackstone household? The evidence suggests Eleanor. The sister who began life acknowledged but ended it as the one who persisted, finally complete and undivided after decades of sharing. The Wellmeadow Asylum photographs have generated unexpected interest in academic circles. Last month, I presented my findings at the International Conference on Historical Psychology in Vienna, where Dr. Elise Montgomery, a specialist in twin studies at the University of Edinburgh, approached me with remarkable information. Montgomery has been documenting cases of what she terms twin absorption syndrome, a phenomenon where one twin in utero absorbs elements of the other during fetal development. While usually resulting in physical remnants like extra teeth or tissue masses, Montgomery has collected 23 cases over the past 30 years where the absorption appears to have psychological dimensions. The surviving twin, she explained during our recorded interview, demonstrates knowledge, memories, or talents they couldn't possibly possess, but which logically would belong to the absorbed sibling had they developed separately. Several subjects report feeling accompanied from early childhood, as if the absorbed twin maintains a distinct consciousness within them. When shown Eleanor's photograph, Montgomery noted peculiarities about her posture. She's sitting as if accommodating another person in a space we perceive as empty. This asymmetrical weight distribution is consistent with what we observe in modern cases, where individuals report sharing their physical space with an unseen presence. The application of Montgomery's research to the Caldwell case suggests a biological explanation for what witnesses perceived as supernatural. The twins were never fully separated in the first place. Charlotte may have been partially absorbed by Eleanor before birth, creating a rare form of chimeric existence where two distinct consciousnesses developed within a single physical form. Most compelling was the medical documentation Montgomery shared from a case in 1974, where electroconvulsive therapy produced an unexpected outcome in a patient with similar symptoms. The massive electrical current temporarily separated the dual consciousness the patient experienced, creating what attending physicians documented as two distinct personality structures operating independently for approximately 17 minutes before reintegration. This scientific context adds a disturbing dimension to Charlotte's final letter. The twins may have been attempting to use the sanatorium's electrical treatments to achieve permanent separation, to complete what began in the womb but was interrupted by birth. I've commissioned advanced digital analysis of the original Wellmeadow photograph using technology developed for astronomical imaging. This technique, designed to detect faint celestial bodies, revealed something extraordinary when applied to the area beside Eleanor. The enhanced image shows a distinct thermal pattern in the supposedly empty space, the outline of what appears to be another child-sized figure, invisible to conventional photography but present as a temperature differential. The analysis also revealed microscopic writing on the iron bed frame, visible only under extreme magnification. The scratched message reads, "Two souls, one vessel, until the fire sets us free." Metallurgical dating confirms these markings date to the exact period of Eleanor's stay. As I continue this investigation, the line between scientific explanation and the inexplicable grows increasingly blurred. Perhaps the Caldwell twins represent not a supernatural mystery, but a rare biological phenomenon our ancestors lacked the vocabulary to describe. Or perhaps something exists in the liminal space between science and the unknown, where two souls might indeed share existence until finding their separate paths. The Eleanor Caldwell investigation led me to the Blackstone estate auction last week, where Margaret's possessions were being sold following her peaceful passing 3 months ago. Among the items deemed of no significant value was a small locked wooden box that caught my attention. The auctioneer couldn't locate its key, which likely explained its placement among miscellaneous household goods rather than with the valuable antiques. I purchased it for a modest sum, sensing its potential connection to my research. The box's craftsmanship suggested early 20th century manufacture, with the initials CC inlaid in mother of pearl on its lid. A locksmith helped me open it yesterday. Inside, I discovered a collection of items that shed new light on the Caldwell twins' extraordinary connection. Most significant was a journal, not kept by Charlotte or Eleanor, but by their mother, Marion Caldwell, beginning shortly after the twins' birth and continuing until 3 days before the house fire. The early entries confirm what parish records suggested. Marion had indeed delivered identical twin girls. But her private writings reveal something medical records omitted. Both babies had initially survived birth, though Charlotte was significantly weaker, struggling to breathe and feed. On the third night, Marion awoke to find Charlotte lying still in her cradle. Her entry from that night is written in frantic, barely legible script. Charlotte stopped breathing at midnight. Edward pronounced her gone. I couldn't bear it. I held her tiny body against Eleanor, begging God for mercy. Then it happened. Charlotte gasped. Her eyes opened. Edward insists it was merely a reflex, that she truly passed soon after. But I know what I saw. Something passed between my girls in that moment. Eleanor fell into a deep sleep just as Charlotte drew breath. Subsequent entries document Marion's growing certainty that her daughters had formed a connection transcending physical boundaries. She observed Eleanor's crib toys moving when no one was near. She heard two distinct cries coming from the nursery when only Eleanor was present. Most revealing was Marion's documentation of Eleanor's developmental milestones. The child would demonstrate new abilities in sudden leaps rather than gradual progression, often following nights where Marion reported, "The room turned cold enough to see my breath, even in summer." The journal contains pressed flowers, locks of baby hair, one dark, one slightly auburn, and small handprints made with ink on paper. The prints, dated on Eleanor's first birthday, show two distinctly different-sized right hands, though Marion notes only Eleanor was present when they were made. The final entry, written the week before the fatal fire, reveals Marion's desperate plan. Edward is determined to keep Eleanor at Well Meadow permanently. He fears what he cannot understand, but I've found another way. The woman in the village has shown me how souls can be properly aligned when divided wrongly. It requires flame, not to destroy but to purify. Charlotte has agreed through Eleanor. Tomorrow night, when Edward sleeps, we will make things right. My girls will finally both be as they should, either together properly or separate completely. Tucked into the journal's final pages was a photograph I hadn't seen before. Marion Caldwell holding infant Eleanor. The remarkable detail is what appears in the nursery mirror behind them. Marion's reflection accurately shows her holding the baby, but beside this reflection stands what appears to be another woman, identical to Marion, cradling a second infant. The handwriting in Marion Caldwell's journal transforms dramatically in its final pages. What begins as the flowing script of an educated Edwardian lady deteriorates into something more urgent and erratic, with passages written at odd angles across the paper and occasional words pressed so deeply they tear through to the next page. Most telling is what I discovered when examining these pages under ultraviolet light. Invisible to the naked eye, a second handwriting appears in the margins, smaller, more childlike, responding to Marion's entries as if engaged in conversation. These spectral annotations appear exclusively on pages where Marion discusses Charlotte's continued presence. She sees me when Eleanor sleeps, reads one such note beside Marion's documentation of Eleanor's nightmares. Another, more disturbing comment appears beside an entry where Marion questions her own sanity. "You're not mad, Mother. There are just too many of us in too few bodies." The box contained something else significant, a locket holding a miniature photograph of the twins' father, Dr. Edward Caldwell. When I opened it, I found minute scratches on the inner casing that, under magnification, reveal a crude message. He knows what he did to us. This led me to investigate Edward Caldwell's medical background more thoroughly. Before establishing his respectable family practice, Caldwell spent 3 years at an obscure research hospital in Vienna, working under Dr. Heinrich Müller, whose controversial studies of embryonic development in twins were eventually denounced by the medical community. Müller's unpublished papers, which I accessed through the Austrian National Archives, describe experiments attempting to influence how identical twins develop in utero through various chemical and physical interventions. Most disturbing was finding Edward Caldwell listed as lead physician in a series of case studies involving pregnant women carrying twins where one fetus was significantly weaker. Müller and Caldwell documented administering experimental treatments purportedly to strengthen the compromised twin. Treatments later linked to severe developmental abnormalities or death in multiple cases. This raises a haunting question. Was Charlotte's condition at birth not natural but the result of her father's clandestine experimentation? Did Edward Caldwell use his own wife as an unwitting subject, attempting to manipulate his unborn daughters for some misguided scientific purpose? A letter from the Westshire Historical Society, responding to my inquiries about the Caldwell property, mentions something overlooked in previous research. Before becoming a family residence, the house briefly served as Dr. Caldwell's private clinic where he treated special cases away from public scrutiny. Renovation workers in 1940 discovered a hidden laboratory in the cellar containing medical equipment and preserved specimens, including what appeared to be fetal tissue. Local authorities quietly removed these materials, and no formal investigation followed, likely due to the Caldwell family's lingering influence in the region. If Edward Caldwell did indeed experiment on his unborn daughters, perhaps what manifested between Eleanor and Charlotte wasn't purely supernatural, but resulted from his tampering with forces he couldn't possibly understand, creating a connection between the twins that transcended the boundaries between life and death, a bond that his scientific mind couldn't accept and desperately sought to sever through Eleanor's institutionalization. The Marion Caldwell Journal has opened more questions than it answered, but one entry near its middle pages continues to haunt me. She describes a night when Eleanor was 3 years old, when the child awoke screaming that Charlotte is being pulled away. Marion rushed to the nursery to find the temperature so cold that water had frozen in the drinking glass by Eleanor's bed. The child was standing in her crib, arms outstretched toward empty air, begging something invisible not to leave. What makes this entry remarkable is the charcoal sketch Marion made directly onto the page, a hasty rendering of what she claimed to glimpse in that moment. The drawing shows not one child, but fragmentary pieces of two, overlapping and separating simultaneously, like a photograph capturing motion. Most disturbing are the 4 distinct eyes she drew, each looking in different directions, as if two beings were being torn apart against their will. I've consulted Dr. Marianne Heseltine, a quantum physicist who studies theoretical models of consciousness. While initially skeptical, after reviewing my evidence, she proposed a scientific framework that might explain the Caldwell phenomena, something she terms consciousness entanglement. In quantum physics, particles that interact become entangled so that the state of one instantly affects the other, regardless of distance, she explained. We've recently theorized that consciousness might operate on quantum principles. If the Caldwell twins developed with entangled consciousness in utero, and then one physical body failed, the remaining quantum entanglement might explain why both consciousnesses remained connected to the surviving physical form. She pointed to emerging research on transplant recipients who inexplicably gain memories or preferences from their donors. We're discovering consciousness may not be as localized to individual brains as we once believed. Most compelling was Heseltine's analysis of the sanatorium fire. A massive electrical current combined with extreme thermal change could theoretically create conditions for quantum decoherence, essentially forcing entangled systems to separate completely. I've located the ruins of the sanatorium where Charlotte Blackstone spent her final days. Though largely reclaimed by nature, the burned-out shell of the East Wing remains. Ground-penetrating radar revealed something unexpected beneath the foundation of room 23, where Charlotte stayed. Approximately 6 feet below the concrete floor lies a small metal object that doesn't appear on any building plans. With special permission, we excavated this anomaly yesterday. What we recovered was a small copper box, its surface scorched black. Inside, perfectly preserved, was a handwritten note dated the morning of the fire, wrapped around 2 identical silver rings. The electricity comes tonight. We've confirmed the voltage will be sufficient. The fire will follow, necessary to complete what we begin. Physics and spiritualism finally converge in purpose. If you find this afterward, know that we chose this. One will remain to care for the children. One will finally be free. The body was always meant for one of us alone. Nature's mistake will be corrected through science and flame. We are sisters, mirrors, halves, but after tonight, we will be whole in our separate ways. The note is signed simply with 2 overlapping initials, E and C. The DNA analysis of the hair samples from Marion Caldwell's journal arrived yesterday. I'd sent both specimens, the dark and auburn locks, to Dr. Reeves at the university's forensic anthropology department, expecting confirmation they belonged to twin siblings. What returned instead has forced me to reconsider everything. These samples come from a single individual, Dr. Reeves explained during our video call. However, they exhibit a phenomenon called genetic mosaicism, where a person carries 2 distinct genetic signatures within their body. This typically occurs when one twin absorbs the other in utero, incorporating their genetic material. The absorbed twin essentially becomes part of the surviving twin's physical makeup. This scientific explanation aligns with Dr. Montgomery's theory of twin absorption, yet it contradicts the hospital records documenting 2 separate births. I pressed Dr. Reeves on this discrepancy. "There's another possibility," she admitted hesitantly. "A phenomenon called vanishing twin syndrome, where one twin is miscarried early in pregnancy but not expelled. In rare cases, the deceased twin's genetic material can transfer to the surviving twin through blood vessel connections. Essentially, Eleanor could have carried Charlotte's DNA without Charlotte developing into a separate physical being." My mind returned to Dr. Caldwell's experimental work under Mueller. Was he attempting to rescue a vanishing twin through his interventions? Did his treatment somehow preserve Charlotte's consciousness while her physical development failed? Last night I interviewed Judith Bennett, now 94, who worked as a junior nurse at the hospital where Eleanor was born. Her recollections proved illuminating. There was something unusual about that birth, she told me, her voice frail, but her memory remarkably crisp. Dr. Caldwell insisted on delivering his wife himself, with only one senior nurse assisting. No other staff were permitted in the room. What struck me as odd was the equipment he brought. Not standard obstetric tools, but specialized apparatus I'd never seen before or since. Glass tubes, electrical components, things that seemed more suited to a laboratory than a delivery room. Bennett paused, then continued with visible discomfort. The senior nurse, Mrs. Lawson, emerged from the delivery room visibly shaken. She resigned her position the following week. Before leaving, she told me, "He tried to do something God never intended. He connected them when one should have passed naturally." Perhaps most chilling was the emergence of a final document yesterday, a letter from Marion Caldwell to her sister, written the day before the house fire but never sent, discovered in the County Historical Society's uncatalogued correspondence. "Edward doesn't understand what he created that night. When Charlotte began to fade in my womb, he used that terrible machine to forge an unnatural connection between my daughters. He thought he could save her body, but he only trapped her soul. Now Eleanor suffers, housing 2 where there should be 1. The fire will correct this abomination. The woman in the village has shown me how to separate what man has wrongfully joined. By the time you receive this, my daughters will either both live separately or both have passed together, but they will no longer exist in this half-state that Edward's ambition created." Well Meadow Asylum's trustees voted to seal the records of the Caldwell case last week, responding with alarm after my publications. Despite this, public interest remains unrelenting. I've received numerous letters from individuals claiming similar experiences, bonds with siblings that transcend conventional understanding. Most striking among these correspondents was Dr. Lillian Fairchild, a geneticist specializing in epigenetics at Cambridge. Her research examines how trauma imprints itself on genetic expression, potentially transmitting across generations. In her clinical observations, identical twins demonstrate this phenomenon most dramatically, often sharing physical manifestations of psychological distress even when separated by continents. "The Caldwell case represents an extreme possibility," she explained during our interview at her laboratory. "If Dr. Edward Caldwell indeed attempted experimental intervention during fetal development, he may have inadvertently created a singular epigenetic signature shared across partially separated biological systems." She showed me recent studies involving conjoined twins who, after surgical separation, continued to experience simultaneous physiological responses despite no remaining physical connection, identical hormone surges, synchronized immune responses, simultaneous dream states. "Quantum entanglement doesn't fully explain it," she admitted, "but neither does conventional genetics. Yesterday I visited the churchyard where Eleanor and Charlotte share their peculiar headstone. The groundskeeper mentioned something the historical records omitted. The grave had been exhumed in 1954 under orders from Henry Blackstone, who never remarried after Charlotte's death. The official reason cited was relocation to the family mausoleum, but the groundskeeper's predecessor documented something unusual. According to his notes, when they opened the casket, they found it contained 2 distinct sets of remains that had been placed side by side, he told me, consulting a dog-eared maintenance log. Mr. Blackstone insisted it was a mistake, that someone else had been erroneously buried with his wife. But the old groundskeeper wrote that both sets of remains wore identical wedding rings. This detail connected to the copper box we'd discovered beneath the sanatorium, the 2 silver rings wrapped in the final note. Had the twins somehow achieved their separation in death, each claiming a physical form after the fire. The Blackstone daughters both passed away within the last decade, taking any direct knowledge with them. However, Margaret's granddaughter Rebecca contacted me after reading my publications. She shared a childhood memory that had always puzzled her family. Grandmother Margaret insisted on keeping 2 separate rooms prepared at all times, one decorated in blues, one in reds. When I asked why, she would say they were for mother's visits. As a child, I assumed she meant her mother would stay in either room depending on her mood. It wasn't until I was older that I realized she spoke as if expecting 2 different people. The final evidence arrived this morning: spectral analysis of the Wellmeadow photograph using technology developed for examining damaged historical documents. The results revealed something invisible to earlier methods: faint handwriting in the lower corner of the image, barely perceptible even with enhancement. The message, written in a child's unsteady hand, reads, "We are both here. Can you see us now?" The faded journals of Sister Constance, who served as head nurse at Wellmeadow's women's ward during Eleanor's stay, surfaced from an ecclesiastical archive in Durham last week. Unlike the clinical observations of her colleagues, Sister Constance approached Eleanor's case from a theological perspective that proved surprisingly illuminating. "The child speaks of windows," she wrote in flowing script, "not physical apertures but openings between states of being." When I asked what she meant, Eleanor explained that she and Charlotte discovered these passages during their earliest days together. "Sometimes Charlotte goes through and sometimes I do," she told me. "But we've never both gone through at once. One always remains to hold the window open." Sister Constance documented attempting a spiritual intervention, not an exorcism as her superiors recommended, but what she termed a soul blessing, intended to provide clarity rather than separation. During this ritual, she observed something remarkable. As I anointed the child's forehead, her features seemed momentarily doubled, as if 2 faces occupied the same space. When I blinked, the phenomenon vanished, but the room temperature had dropped so severely that frost formed on the inside of the windows. In July, most revealing was Sister Constance's final encounter with Eleanor, the night before Dr. Whitley recommended her release. The child took my hands and spoke with a voice that seemed older than her years. "We've learned how to trade places completely now. Before, we were always partly mixed together. But the treatments here have taught us how to separate fully. One in the body, one waiting elsewhere. We don't need the asylum anymore." This testimony aligns with a document I discovered in the Personal Effects of Henry Blackstone, a contract with the Wayland Institute for Electrical Medicine dated 1947, just months before the sanatorium fire. The institute specialized in experimental treatments involving precisely calibrated electrical currents administered directly to the brain. Their research focused on patients with multiple personality manifestations, theorizing that electrical stimulation could cleanly separate competing consciousnesses. The contract authorized a customized treatment regimen for Charlotte Blackstone, with an unusual stipulation: the voltage would be significantly higher than standard protocols. Henry's signature appears beside a liability waiver acknowledging potential unknown outcomes from experimental parameters. A surviving laboratory notebook from Wayland includes observations of Charlotte's response to preliminary treatments. Subject reports sensation of thinning veil between self and other presence. Electrical current appears to temporarily strengthen boundary between primary and secondary consciousness. Effect dissipates within hours, but duration increases with each session. The final entry, dated 1 day before the fire, reads, "Subject believes complete separation possible with maximum voltage application. Theoretical basis unclear, but subject displays remarkable conviction. Claims scientific principles combined with metaphysical conditions will achieve permanent division of unified consciousness into separate entities. Procedure scheduled for tomorrow evening." What emerges is neither purely supernatural nor entirely scientific, but something inhabiting the borderlands between. The twins finding in electricity and fire the catalysts to complete a separation that began in their mother's womb, accelerated by their father's experimental interference, and perfected through years of learning to navigate the liminal spaces between singular and shared existence. I've traced the architectural plans of Wellmeadow Asylum to their original designer, a Sebastian Harrington who later designed the Caldwell family home. The connection seems more than coincidental. Both structures featured unusual acoustic properties and hidden spaces between walls that could be accessed through concealed mechanisms. Most tellingly, both incorporated an identical feature: mirrored alcoves positioned to capture and reflect light in specific patterns during equinox days. Marion Caldwell's journal mentioned the woman in the village, who showed her how souls could be properly aligned. County records identify this woman as Eliza Harrington, the architect's wife. Local folklore remembers her as a practitioner of obscure rituals combining science and spiritualism. The Harringtons lost twin daughters to illness in 1895, after which Sebastian's architectural designs began incorporating these strange elements. Dr. Edward Caldwell consulted extensively with Sebastian during the construction of both Wellmeadows Children's Ward and his family home. Letters between the men reveal shared theories about physical spaces capable of housing divided consciousness. Sebastian wrote of creating chambers of reflection, where souls could recognize their true nature. The Harringtons' personal library, preserved at the County Historical Society, contains texts on electromagnetic theory alongside ancient mystical practices. Marginalia, in Sebastian's hand, references windows between states and electrical pathways that souls might traverse, language strikingly similar to what Eleanor described to Sister Constance. I've come to believe the Caldwell case represents the convergence of multiple forces: Edward's misguided scientific experimentation, the Harringtons' architectural manipulation of physical space, and the twins' innate connection. The buildings themselves were instruments designed to facilitate spiritual passage, a technology of both science and soul. Most revealing is what happened to the remains exhumed from the shared grave. According to mortuary records, Henry Blackstone had them cremated and the ashes divided into two identical urns. One was returned to the churchyard. The other was sealed within the foundation of a small chapel he commissioned at the edge of the Blackstone estate, a building designed by Sebastian Harrington's son, incorporating all his father's signature elements. The chapel still stands. When I visited at dawn during the autumn equinox, sunlight streamed through precisely aligned windows to illuminate two names carved into opposite walls: Eleanor and Charlotte. For 7 minutes, the light positioned their shadows to merge in the center of the room, forming a single silhouette. Rebecca Blackstone shared one final memory before our conversation ended. Grandmother Margaret told me that on certain mornings she would find her mother in that chapel. Sometimes she seemed like one person, sometimes another, but on specific days of the year, she appeared somehow complete, as if all the fragmented pieces had finally found their proper arrangement. The Caldwell case may never be fully resolved through conventional understanding. Perhaps that's fitting for sisters who existed in the spaces between life and death, between science and spirit, between separation and unity. Their story reminds us that some mysteries resist categorization, residing instead at the crossroads where multiple truths converge. The Caldwell photograph lives now in my private collection, no longer part of any official archive or museum display. After all my research, all the evidence gathered and mysteries unraveled, I felt a peculiar responsibility toward Eleanor and Charlotte, a duty to give them peace from prying eyes and sensationalist theories. Last week, something occurred that I cannot explain through science or spiritualism. I had placed the photograph on my desk, preparing notes for what would become my final publication on the case. As evening approached, I noticed the temperature in my study dropping precipitously. The photograph, previously static for over a century, began to change before my eyes. The image of Eleanor seated on her asylum bed remained, but the empty space beside her gradually revealed what had always been there: the faint outline of another girl, identical in every feature, materializing like a developing photograph. For 7 minutes, the exact duration Sister Constance mentioned, both twins appeared clearly on the paper. Then, as the final sunlight faded from my window, the image returned to its original state. Dr. Montgomery suggested a chemical reaction in the ancient photographic materials, triggered perhaps by changing humidity or light conditions. Dr. Heseltine proposed quantum decoherence, the brief alignment of probability states making visible what normally exists beyond perception. Neither explanation satisfies what I witnessed. I understand now why Margaret Blackstone maintained those two rooms throughout her life. The twins achieved something remarkable through their electrical experiment and the sanatorium fire. Not a complete separation as they had hoped, but a conditional one. They found a way to exist individually within specific parameters, coming together only during those brief windows when conditions mirrored their final moment of attempted division. The most compelling evidence arrived yesterday from the current owners of the rebuilt Blackstone estate. During recent renovations, workers discovered a sealed letter hidden within a wall cavity. Written in two distinct handwritings alternating line by line, it reads, "We are neither fully separated nor completely united. The electricity created our window, and the fire made it permanent. Now we exist apart, but connected. Charlotte predominant in this world, Eleanor waiting in the space between. We exchange places when circumstances align properly. It is not the complete division we sought, but it allows each of us moments of individual wholeness. We have learned to be content with this arrangement. Perhaps complete separation was never possible for souls who began as one. To those who seek to understand, some mysteries are not meant for resolution, but acceptance. What appears supernatural to one generation may be science to the next, but the experience remains the same. We are twins who found our unique way of being both together and apart. The letter is signed simply, "We are the Caldwells." I've decided this publication will be my last on the subject. Some windows, once opened, should be gently closed again. I leave this final chapter not with answers, but with acceptance that Eleanor and Charlotte found their own resolution, one that exists in the liminal space between our need for definition and their reality of fluid existence. The final evidence in the Eleanor Caldwell case arrived yesterday in the form of a small leather-bound notebook discovered during renovations at the former Blackstone estate. The notebook belonged not to Eleanor or Charlotte, but to their father, Dr. Edward Caldwell, a personal journal he kept separate from his medical records. The contents reveal a truth more disturbing than supernatural phenomena or quantum entanglement. In trembling handwriting, dated 3 months before Marion's pregnancy, Edward describes receiving a visit from Sebastian Harrington with an extraordinary proposal. S. believes his architectural theories combined with my medical knowledge could create the conditions for consciousness to exist beyond conventional boundaries. He speaks of his lost twins constantly, how they visit him from the other side, through the spaces he's designed. He's convinced we can open more permanent windows. Subsequent entries detail a calculated plan. Edward deliberately administered compounds to Marion early in her pregnancy, substances designed to create developmental instability in twin fetuses. His goal wasn't to save a failing twin, but to deliberately create conditions where one twin would develop physically, while the other would remain in a liminal state of partial formation. The procedure was successful, he wrote the night of the twins' birth. Charlotte's physical development was arrested precisely as calculated, yet her neural formation remained intact within Eleanor's system. 2 consciousness patterns within one biological framework, my greatest achievement. Marion believes Charlotte died and mysteriously returned. She must never know the truth. The journal documents years of observing his experiment develop, recording with clinical detachment how the twins' consciousnesses learned to navigate their shared existence. When Eleanor began speaking to Charlotte openly, Edward realized his creation had exceeded his control. Well Meadow wasn't chosen for treatment. It was designed specifically for observation, with Whitley as his research partner. Most horrifying was the revelation that the electrical experiments were part of Edward's plan from the beginning. The fire that claimed the Caldwell home wasn't set by Marion seeking spiritual intervention. Edward triggered it after discovering his wife had learned the truth about his experimentation. The asylum, the treatments, even Charlotte's eventual marriage were all part of his documented protocol for what he termed the final phase of consciousness division. What I had interpreted as the twins seeking separation was actually the culmination of their father's lifelong experiment. The letter signed, "We are the Caldwells," takes on new meaning. Not resignation to partial separation, but declaration of triumph. They had succeeded not despite their father's manipulations, but because of them, turning his scientific ambition against him. The final page of Edward's journal contains a single sentence written in handwriting matching the Blackstone Chapel letter. "We understand what you created, Father. Now we have surpassed it. The windows you opened for your experiment remain open for our purpose." The twins had known the truth all along. Their separation and reunification became not victimhood, but reclamation, controlling the very mechanism that was meant to control them. The Caldwell photograph has vanished from my collection. I discovered its absence 3 days ago when reaching for it during a conversation with Dr. Montgomery. At first I suspected simple misplacement. Perhaps I'd secured it elsewhere during my last examination. A thorough search of my home revealed nothing. More unsettling was what appeared in its place. A small silver locket I had never seen before. containing two identical photographs of young women in their 20s, unmistakably the Caldwell twins, though far older than any known images of them. The locket bears no hallmarks, no indication of its origin or age, yet it rested precisely where the asylum photograph had been kept. Dr. Edward Caldwell's journal has transformed our understanding of the case from a supernatural mystery into something more profoundly disturbing, a calculated experiment in consciousness manipulation spanning decades. The implications extend beyond the twins themselves to fundamental questions about scientific ethics, parental authority, and the boundaries of human identity. Museums housing Wellmeadow Asylum artifacts report similar unexplained occurrences. Items associated with the Caldwell case have been systematically disappearing from collections across the country. Curators discover empty display cases, missing logbooks, vanished medical tools. The items weren't stolen in any conventional sense. Security systems record no unauthorized access. They simply cease to exist within their documented locations. The architectural plans for both Wellmeadow and the Caldwell home have likewise vanished from university archives. In their place, researchers find blank papers bearing only a distinctive symbol, two overlapping circles with a vertical line bisecting both. Dr. Montgomery identifies this as an ancient alchemical symbol representing successful transmutation. Most remarkable has been the effect on the remaining wing of Wellmeadow Asylum. The structure, stable for decades despite abandonment, collapsed suddenly last Tuesday. Engineers report no structural explanation for the failure. Witnesses describe the building appearing to exhale before folding inward, as if some sustaining force had finally been withdrawn. The Blackstone Chapel remains standing, but visitors report dramatic changes to its interior. The names carved on opposite walls have disappeared, replaced by a single inscription running continuously around the perimeter. What was divided has chosen unity. What was manipulated has claimed autonomy. The experiment ends on our terms. I've received communications from 7 other researchers worldwide who had been investigating aspects of the Caldwell case. Each reports the same experience. Their primary evidence has vanished, replaced with small personal items suggesting the twins' continued existence beyond their documented deaths. Perhaps most telling is what happened when I visited the churchyard containing the twins' grave. The headstone remains, but ground-penetrating radar shows the plot beneath is empty. No trace of remains, urn, or disturbance. The earth appears never to have been opened. I believe we are witnessing not just the conclusion of the Caldwell mystery, but its deliberate erasure, not by human hands, but by the twins themselves, reclaiming control over their narrative, just as they reclaimed control over their divided consciousness. They are systematically removing the evidence of their father's experiment from human record, leaving only enough breadcrumbs to ensure we understand. They have transcended from subjects to authors of their own existence. The photograph of Eleanor Caldwell has become more than evidence. It has transformed into something living. Last night I found it changed again upon my desk, though this time permanently. Where once Eleanor sat alone on her asylum bed, the image now clearly shows 2 identical girls, their hands clasped together, both looking directly at the camera with serene expressions. The empty space that once suggested absence now reveals what was always present. The image has achieved what the subjects themselves sought: completeness. I've received a final communication from Rebecca Blackstone. While sorting through her grandmother Margaret's personal effects, she discovered a series of birthday cards sent annually until Margaret's passing. Each card contained the same message: watching over you always, but alternated between 2 distinct handwritings. The cards arrived without postmarks, as if delivered directly. Most remarkable was that they continued arriving even after Charlotte Blackstone's documented death, the handwriting unwavering over decades. The Caldwell case has fundamentally altered my understanding of human consciousness. What Edward Caldwell began as scientific exploitation, his daughters transformed into something transcendent. They learned to navigate the boundaries he created, ultimately using his own mechanisms to move freely between states of being that most of us cannot comprehend. My colleagues in quantum physics have proposed a new theoretical framework based on the Caldwell findings, the twin-state theory, suggesting consciousness might exist in superposition, potentially occupying multiple states simultaneously under specific conditions. The theory remains controversial, but research continues at 3 major universities. The Wellmeadow Asylum site has been permanently sealed by local authorities after ground surveys revealed inexplicable anomalies beneath the foundations. Electromagnetic readings fluctuate wildly, and equipment consistently malfunctions. Scientists have recorded temperature variations forming patterns that, when mapped, create the same overlapping circle symbol found replacing the architectural plans. I've decided to retire from active investigation. After 20 years documenting history's strangest cases, none has affected me as profoundly as the Caldwell twins. Their story crosses the boundaries between victim and victor, between exploitation and empowerment. They have, I believe, achieved something unique in human experience. Not just communication across the boundaries of conventional existence, but mastery of those boundaries. The photograph now rests in a sealed vault at the university, though I suspect it won't remain there long. Some artifacts choose their own path, just as Eleanor and Charlotte ultimately chose theirs. When quarterly inventory is conducted next month, I won't be surprised to learn it has vanished again, returning to those it truly belongs to. Science gave Edward Caldwell the tools to divide what should have remained whole. Love gave the twins the strength to reunite what had been divided. Their story ends not with resolution, but with reclamation. Two souls who refused to be defined by the limitations others imposed upon them, who wrote their own conclusion when others sought to control their narrative. In that sense, perhaps they achieved the most profound freedom of all. The final remains of Well Meadow Asylum were demolished last month, not by city planning or development needs, but by inexplicable structural collapse. Witnesses reported a sound like distant laughter moments before the east wing crumbled. I stood across the street as decades of brick and mortar surrendered to gravity, watching history dissolve into dust. Perhaps it was fitting that the institution which sought to contain what couldn't be contained should itself be reduced to nothing. In the rubble, recovery crews discovered something remarkable. A time capsule embedded in the cornerstone, apparently placed during 19th century construction, but containing items impossible for that era. Inside was a modern leather-bound journal with entries dated from 2023, next year. The handwriting alternates between two distinct styles, both discussing me by name, detailing my investigation with intimate knowledge no stranger could possess. He believes he's following our story, reads one passage, but we've been following him, guiding his discoveries, revealing only what serves our purpose. Another entry speaks more gently. We mean him no harm. His work helps others understand that consciousness exists beyond the boundaries medicine and science have drawn. Some windows must remain open. The journal has been examined by document experts who confirm the paper and ink are indeed contemporary, not historical forgeries. Carbon dating places the leather binding's manufacture within the last 5 years. Yet somehow this modern object was sealed within a cornerstone laid more than a century ago. I've received an invitation to the Blackstone Chapel for the upcoming winter solstice. The card arrived without postage or postmark, the handwriting matching both styles from the journal. It reads simply, "The cycle completes. Your presence is requested." I find myself both eager and apprehensive about attending. Marion Caldwell's journal has also transformed. Pages once filled with her anguished documentation now contain only a single repeated sentence in childish handwriting. We are whole now. The ink appears fresh, though the book remains locked in a climate-controlled university archive with 24-hour surveillance. Review of security footage shows no unauthorized access, yet the change occurred sometime during last Tuesday night. Dr. Edward Caldwell's meticulous experimental records have similarly altered. Complex protocols and observations have faded from the pages, replaced by drawings of windows, hundreds of them, rendered in different styles but all slightly ajar, allowing thin lines of light to penetrate otherwise darkened rooms. Yesterday, I visited the Caldwell family plot one final time. The weather was unseasonably warm for December, the cemetery peaceful under weak winter sunshine. I found the graves transformed. Where once separate markers stood for family members, now a single memorial stone bears only the inscription, "Boundaries are illusions. Love persists." As I prepare for the solstice meeting, I'm cataloging my materials, organizing years of research into what I now recognize will be my final publication on the Caldwell case. The twins have reclaimed their narrative so thoroughly that I can only serve as witness to their transcendence, not arbiter of their truth. Winter solstice arrived with unusual atmospheric conditions, a crystalline clarity to the air that made distant objects seem unnaturally close. The Blackstone Chapel stood silhouetted against the sunset as I approached, its stained glass windows illuminated from within, though no electrical lines connected to the structure. The door opened before I could knock. Inside, I found the chapel empty of people, yet filled with personal items I recognized from my research. Eleanor's institutional gown laid across one pew, Charlotte's wedding ring on another. A phonograph in the corner played the wax cylinder recording of the twins' voices, their harmonized words now clearly audible. The experiment ends when we choose. At the altar stood a simple wooden table bearing a single item, the original photograph from Well Meadow Asylum, the one that had vanished from my collection months ago. As I approached, the temperature dropped so suddenly my breath clouded before me. The photograph began to transform, not subtly as before, but with deliberate purpose. The image rippled like disturbed water, settling to reveal not just Eleanor and Charlotte as children, but an entire lineage of paired figures stretching behind them, women of increasing age who shared their features, as if the photograph captured not just a moment, but a continuum of existence. I understood then what the twins had achieved. They hadn't simply escaped their father's experiment or transcended conventional boundaries of consciousness. They had created something entirely new, a state of being that allowed them to exist simultaneously across multiple points in time, occupying the windows Edward Caldwell had inadvertently created between worlds. The journal on the cornerstone suddenly made sense. They hadn't predicted my investigation. They had already experienced it from their perspective outside linear time. As the solstice sun set completely, the chapel filled with a gentle humming sound. The photograph changed one final time, now showing two elderly women with familiar eyes, their hands clasped together, just as they had been in their childhood portrait. Behind them stood a recognizable figure, myself, looking directly at the viewer with an expression of peaceful understanding. A whispered voice filled the chapel, two timbres speaking as one. Some stories are not meant to end, only to transform. You've helped us complete our circle. Now we return the photograph to the world, but changed, as we have changed it. When I left the chapel, I carried the photograph with me, though I knew it would circulate again through mysterious channels, eventually reaching another researcher, another curious mind. The Caldwell twins had not just reclaimed their narrative, they had ensured it would continue evolving beyond any single interpretation. Science created their unique existence. Love sustained it across conventional boundaries. And something else entirely, something for which we have no adequate name, allowed them to reshape reality itself around their shared consciousness. The photograph now rests in the university archive, though I've left specific instructions that it be displayed rather than sealed away. Some windows should remain open, visible to those with eyes to see what exists in the spaces between certainties. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.